The air at gate C-27 was thick with the stale smell of reheated breakfast sandwiches and burnt coffee. People shuffled back and forth, eyes glued to their phones, feet tapping anxiously on the worn carpet. A loudspeaker crackled overhead, announcing the boarding call for Flight 388 to Chicago Midway. First-class passengers were invited to proceed to the gate. From the waiting crowd stepped Anthony Reed, dressed in a sharp navy blazer over a crisp white Oxford shirt. His face was clean-shaven, save for a trace of 5 o'clock shadow that hinted at a long week behind him. He carried a well-worn leather messenger bag slung over one shoulder with a paperback copy of Invisible Man tucked under his arm. Anthony didn't rush. His pace was steady, deliberate, the kind of confidence that comes from doing something 100 times before. The gate agent smiled as he handed over his boarding pass. Anthony responded with a polite nod, never flashy, never drawing more attention than necessary. Just another business traveler blending into the background, or so he thought. Inside the plane, the soft hum of overhead vents mixed with the faint scent of airline disinfectant. Anthony made his way to seat 3A, a window seat in the first row of first class. He slid in smoothly, buckled up, and opened his book. His lips curled faintly upward as he reread the familiar first lines. He'd been through these pages before, but somehow they always spoke to him differently each time. The seat beside him, 3B, soon filled. A woman in her late 40s, dressed in a tailored beige coat and polished gold earrings, maneuvered gracefully into the spot. Her designer bag nestled neatly under the seat, her heels unsuitable for airport walks clicked softly against the floor. Her name was Valerie Stockton. Her phone screen blinked with 2 missed calls and a tightly packed calendar full of meetings. She adjusted the silk scarf around her neck and gave Anthony a cursory glance. She did a subtle double take. Anthony didn't look up. He turned a page. Valerie crossed and uncrossed her legs, fidgeted with her ring, and stole more glances at him from the corner of her eye. Every unnecessary movement spoke volumes, louder than words ever could. Anthony could feel the weight of her gaze, that unmistakable shift in the air when someone's curiosity turns into judgment. The young flight attendant, a fresh-faced man with close-cropped hair and perfect posture, came by offering pre-flight refreshments. Valerie declined with a tight-lipped smile. Anthony accepted a cup of water, nodding his thanks. When the attendant walked away, Valerie broke the silence, her tone laced with practiced politeness. "Headed to Chicago for business?" she asked casually. Anthony lowered his book just a fraction. "Yes. You?" "Conference," she replied. "Healthcare compliance. Riveting stuff." "Government or private sector?" he asked, his tone neutral, uninterested in volunteering much more. She gave a slight smile. "Private." The conversation died there, but the tension didn't. Valerie continued to glance at him between bites of silence. Her eyes filled with questions she didn't dare ask aloud. Instead, she adjusted her scarf again and pretended to be absorbed in her phone. As the plane's doors closed and the flight crew secured the cabin, Anthony leaned back, setting his book aside with the intent to rest. But it wasn't long before he heard Valerie call softly to the attendant. "Excuse me," she began, her voice gentle but edged. "I hate to trouble you, but I think there's an issue with my seat." "Is it broken, ma'am?" the attendant asked. "Not exactly." She shot a quick glance at Anthony before lowering her voice further. I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable. Is there any way I could switch seats?" The attendant frowned, confused. "I believe we're full today, but I can check." "May I ask what's making you uncomfortable?" Valerie hesitated, eyes darting back toward Anthony. "To just have a bad feeling. You know, a gut instinct." Anthony opened his eyes, turning slowly toward her. "Is there something you'd like to ask me directly?" His voice was calm, steady. Valerie blinked, caught off guard. No, of course not. Sometimes you just feel these things." "Unsafe?" he asked, unflinching. "I didn't say that," she responded too quickly. "Yes, you did." The young attendant stood frozen between them, unsure how to proceed. Anthony leaned back again, folding his hands across his lap. "If you have something to ask me, just ask. Don't hide behind your gut instinct." Color rose in Valerie's cheeks. "I'm not accusing you of anything. She trailed off, her fingers tightening around the phone in her lap. The attendant excused himself to speak with the lead flight attendant. Anthony sighed, not in frustration, but with the bone-deep exhaustion that comes from recognizing the pattern all too well. 15 minutes into the flight, at cruising altitude, the lead attendant approached, this time accompanied by a supervisor. The supervisor crouched politely at their row, introducing himself as Thomas. "I understand there's been a concern. I'd like to hear both sides." Valerie jumped at the opportunity. "I asked to be reseated because I feel uncomfortable. I don't understand why my request is being ignored." Thomas turned to Anthony. "Sir, would you mind telling me your side of the story?" Anthony met his gaze directly. "She doesn't like that I'm sitting here. She called it instinct. Said I gave her a bad feeling." The words hung between them, stark and undeniable. Valerie flushed deeper as Thomas considered both of them carefully. "Sir, would you mind showing me your identification?" Without hesitation, Anthony reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a black leather badge holder. He flipped it open to reveal his federal ID and badge. Special Agent Anthony Reed, Department of Justice. The silence that followed was deafening. Valerie's face drained of color, her mouth slightly ajar as the reality of the moment sank in. The supervisor straightened, his voice now noticeably gentler. "Thank you for your cooperation, sir." Anthony nodded once, tucking the badge away without flourish. Valerie couldn't meet his gaze. She stared down at her phone, the screen now black. Her fingers hovered over it but never moved. The flight continued. Anthony leaned back, closed his eyes, and tried to ignore the familiar sting of disappointment. It wasn't anger that sat heavy in his chest. It was the weariness of knowing this wouldn't be the last time. That even with the badge, the credentials, the authority would always be questioned first. When the plane finally touched down, passengers began their routine hustle to collect bags and crowd the aisle. Anthony remained seated, unbothered by the rush. Valerie stood, but before leaving, she turned back to him. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice cracking. "Not just because of your badge. Because I was wrong." Anthony met her gaze, steady and measured. "You saw it. That's a start." She nodded, eyes glassy, and walked away, the lesson etched into her expression. Anthony rose, slung his bag over his shoulder, and exited the plane like any other traveler. But as he walked through the terminal, he knew the eyes that followed him weren't just seeing a man. They were seeing the story they just witnessed unfold. A story that, for far too many, was still all too familiar. The air at Gate C-27 was thick with the stale smell of reheated breakfast sandwiches and burnt coffee. People shuffled back and forth, eyes glued to their phones, feet tapping anxiously on the worn carpet. A loudspeaker crackled overhead, announcing the boarding call for Flight 388 to Chicago Midway. First-class passengers were invited to proceed to the gate. From the waiting crowd stepped Anthony Reed, dressed in a sharp navy blazer over a crisp white Oxford shirt. His face was clean-shaven,